Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our show. I believe this is going to be our finale for our little mini season, which I just sprung onto our guest, Max Protzen, today.
Oh
Besides that, how are you?
no. I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I you all will have heard me before, so it's not going to be a new voice for you.
Yeah, we haven't seen Max. Max helped me out for any of you who saw the first episode, which was my showcase on who's Bryce, why is he the host, what has he done, and I figured it'd be a nice way to wrap up the season of. It's the two of us that started it.
A
Started it.
bookend,
It's
I
going to be
see.
two. Yeah, we're going to end it. So, for those who don't know you, what is your current title? What type of personnel? What are you? Who are you?
Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Max. I gosh. Well, when I answer this question in public, this is always how I do it. So, I clean. I clean apartments for a living, generally vacation homes, and then that is in service of art, which is theater in this case. I'm a theater artist. Generally, I'm a lighting designer, but I also do what I call auxiliary directing, which is stage combat and intimacy direction for theater.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna guess that the majority of our conversation is gonna be more on the vein of theater and not that
I
cleaning
have
houses is
I
your
have
career.
zero professional training in cleaning.
Great. We'll just toss that to the side for now.
Yeah, it is
So
a survival job, as we call it in the arts.
it is for money as needed. So how big of a story, how far back does theater go for you? Like, are we talking high school? Have you been acting since a kid?
So my joke I always tell when people ask this question is that I've been going to the theater since before I was born, because my parents were subscription ticket holders to the local theater company. But it started in earnest when I was 5 years old, and my mother put me in a production of The Wizard of Oz because she needed something to do with me. And I was a munchkin. And ever since then, I have done between 2 and 7 shows a year. So yeah, it's been nonstop since then.
So that answers the. You've been exposed to theater long enough to where you quite enjoy it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
At least I'd hope.
Yes.
Munchkin
Definitely.
Max grows up. Is there anything in high school, like to take a little pit stop there, that you needed to do in order to have any kind of? I'm guessing you went to college for theater such.
I did. I actually was extraordinarily lucky. I went to a specialized high school, which was a performing arts school. So I had 3 hours every day of just arts education, and in fact later 4 hours in my later years. So yeah, I was very, very lucky in the fact that I got that opportunity. And then it also, one could say, was unlucky, but we'll talk about that in a minute once we get to college. So high school, I was a part of the what do you call that? I was a part of the International Thespian Society, and so we went and we did performances around Albuquerque, and then I competed at the International Thespian Conference in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it was there that I got to do what is called unified audition, which is I got up in front of 65 schools and auditioned in 90 seconds for 65 different schools. Way more effective than a lot of unifieds. Like, a lot of unifieds are you show up and then you spend the whole day going from room to room to room in a big hotel conference center auditioning individually. But yeah, I auditioned for 65 schools. I was extraordinarily lucky to get 22 of those schools to ask me back. I later learned that that was actually a very high percentage. So that was very lucky. And from there, I started the very difficult search for the university I wanted to go to. I say very difficult because I started with 22. By the end of the weekend, I had narrowed it down to much fewer, and and then I began to look into various schools, literally all over the country: California, Connecticut, New York, Minneapolis,
Good widespread.
all over the place. So I'm looking into all of those places, and then the last thing that really impacted the college decision was, of course, that I competed in another thespian conference, and I won Best Music Theater Performer in my state. I then had a school literally an hour away from my house offer me a nearly full ride scholarship to go.
Damn.
Yes. So I wasn't really interested in this school. I actually need to preface this. A lot of my story is built heavily on privilege. Just the ability to spend all of my time and money doing theater is a privilege, and I need to acknowledge that before we move deeper into this. So I was interested in that school, but not super interested in that school. Their program was very odd. It seemed based on, like, it was a for-profit school. That's the first thing I should say. And I don't believe in for-profit almost anything. Because I don't see why people need to be making profit if they're making a good living. That's, I guess, the socialist in me. So it was a for-profit school. So I was really worried, because it was a for-profit school, that there would be certain things. For example, they did around 43 shows a year at the time that I was looking at the school, and that was because they did a lot of what was called chamber theater. They would find whatever space anywhere on campus and sell tickets to 12, 15 people to come see a show in this classroom or in the cafeteria or wherever. So there was a lot of opportunity to do a lot of theater, but not necessarily at a high caliber, which mattered to me. So
that's nuts, by the way. That's for anyone who might seem like that's a big number. That seems big. That's gigantic.
Yeah. It's a really massive number. So then I was looking at various other places. Slowly the list was dwindling for financial reasons. I couldn't afford to go to some schools, or they didn't offer me any scholarships, or just living in that state was way more expensive than living where I was living, and I couldn't make it work financially. And so then my mother says, let's go to the University of Arizona. And let's just have a look at that. And so I was like, okay, if we're going to go to the University of Arizona, I've also heard that UNLV has a really great theater program. So we did a little tour of the University of Arizona, ASU, just because it was there, and UNLV. ASU was an immediate out. It was just not a vibe. UNLV, I was there, did not like the school at all, and the program didn't seem very exciting. The University of Arizona, I fell in love with on a tour. I really liked it. So then I scheduled my audition for the theater program, and I went and I auditioned. And that is a horrific story of tragedy that turned out well for me, but boy, in the heat of the moment, it didn't feel great. But I auditioned to the University of Arizona, and I was actually selected in the first batch. They have multiple batches, so it's the first group, and then there's the wait list, and then from there they get through until they can select. I believe normally they try to do 12 students. Yeah.
Do you know how many apply in any given year?
The year that I auditioned, we had a 1% acceptance rate. So yeah, there were 12 of us. So that's all you gotta do. There's around 1,200 people who auditioned for the program that year. Wow. And that wasn't even the most people that ever auditioned for that program. By the time I was a senior, we had 6,000 students auditioning for that program, and we still were capped at 12. Yeah. So 12 or 15, I don't know. There was a cap, but we were within it for sure. So I got accepted to the first round. So I had to now make a choice between that school in New Mexico and the University of Arizona. And ultimately, the University of Arizona offered me a lot more money, and I liked the program more because they had a really good track record for getting students into professional work, like not like a lot on Broadway too, but also just working professionally in theater. They had a good track record for that. So I was like, sounds like a good deal. So yeah, that's the sort of high school to starting at the University of Arizona track.
Well, cool deal. So was the experience at the U of A what you were hoping it would be? There's one side of the coin to where, they pop out people professionally, but is that an enjoyable experience? Or do you feel like you actually were getting prepared?
I really enjoyed my time at the University of Arizona for the most part. I had problems with teachers, as everyone does, but the biggest problem for me was, as I said before, I went to a performing arts school for high school. And so I was actually, additionally, it was a college preparatory performing arts school. So we were academically rigored and artistically rigorous. And yes, so I attended my first year at the University of Arizona. And at the end of the first year, I wrote an extremely strongly worded letter to the faculty about the fact that they had wasted my time and money. And I was nearly thrown out of the program for doing it because I was ungrateful. And I was like, I'm sorry, but this is fundamentally a business, and you have not provided your customer with the service that they were told they were going to get. Basically, I was extraordinarily lucky and went to that college preparatory performing arts school. They taught me everything that was covered in my first year at the University of Arizona. So I was immensely bored. The sophomore, junior, and senior years, very different story. We really were worked very hard. Bryce was my roommate for 2 years, and he knows. It was always so funny. People would always be like, "Oh yeah, but it's just like an arts degree. Surely it's not that hard." Bryce would be sitting there. He'd be like, "Max leaves at 8 a.m. and comes back at 11 p.m. Like,
I barely know what he looks like some seasons."
Yeah. Yeah. The University of Arizona was rigorous in my estimation. We were held to a professional standard in rehearsal, and then in classes, it was an arts education. So it was. Some people will say it was worthless. Other people will say it was useful. It all depends on what you end up doing. I have a lot of friends who aren't doing theater or film, and they say it was a waste of their time, and I'm like, well, yeah, it's a theater degree. Like,
you don't use the degree for any career related.
Yeah,
every single one would be a waste.
But another extraordinary privilege I had was the University of Arizona had a professor named Brent Gibbs, who was also a extremely skilled stage combat director. And he taught an entire year-long course on stage combat, which meant I left the University of Arizona with a 4-year certification in unarmed combat, rapier dagger combat, and broadsword combat. So most people have to go and pay like thousands to get all 3 of those certifications, and it was included in my education. It also kind of ignited this like weird little thing in me, which is that I have this skill that a lot of people need and don't know how to do. So it was a good source of income for me at that point, and still continues to be.
Just don't ever catch him on the road with the sword in his hand. You're fucked.
Yeah.
Would you say, as far as your education at the U of A, for anyone who's considering doing theater, we'll say U of A, even though obviously the odds are very much against a person.
Also, the program has since dissolved and is now, they've rebuilt it into a completely new program. I can't vouch for the U of A anymore. But it was at the time, for me, a very good program.
So I guess in that vein, because we could still have it be useful of a conversation, was it more the time in the classroom that was really what built the foundation in education for you? Is it the explicit show times and those rehearsals that you feel like were the foundation and build up, or was some of both? Anything in that vein to talk about?
Classwork was good. It did an excellent job. When it comes to things like theater performance, you just need rehearsals and on-stage time. I mean, the classwork is important. Like, you learn a lot about how to make rehearsals way easier for yourself. You learn how to analyze these things, and basically, like, for the longest time, we were all complaining about constantly having to do a character analysis, a play analysis, a scene analysis for everything we were doing. And then they were like, the reason you're doing all of that now is so that by the time that you go into the professional world, you just read the script and you're already doing those things in your head without thinking about it. And it's true. I do that now. Like, I'm just reading a script and I'm doing all the coursework that I did at the U of A, but now it's not for a grade and I'm not putting it down on paper. I just have it. And they were right. It's very effective for that. So the classwork is important, but ultimately rehearsing and performing is also important. Something I was very lucky about, again, another level of privilege, was I asked if instead of acting one semester, I could assistant direct one of the main stage performances. And Brent Gibbs, again, was kind enough to say yes. And that sent me down an entirely different track in life. I still got to work in theater and use a theater degree, but instead of acting, which was my sole direction at that point, I started to think there are other options for me here.
So most people who get a theater degree, is it geared as a performance space or stagecraft
question.
Or anything like that?
There's generally three fields. There's generally I guess four fields, actually, you can say. There is a general theater studies degree. This is history and script analysis and criticism and performance and technical everything. At the University of Arizona, it is called a Bachelor of Arts. Then there are specialized degree, a Bachelor's of Fine Arts. At U of A, they offered an acting one, as well as light, sound, costume, set, and I believe there was also technical direction. And those are a bunch of technical fields. And then on a master's level, but also at different universities, there's things like a specialized degree in theater criticism or theater direction or playwriting. There's a wide variety of theater degrees you can get.
Good deal, because I know that some people, like, I know when I was in high school, I enjoyed the stagecraft and the pit orchestra side. I wasn't a on-stage performer in that sense, but I liked the vein of theater. And there might be some people out there who enjoy theatrics, but don't have talent, in their opinion, for being the ones singing off the oh-so-wonderful Shakespeare that everyone enjoys and loves and has no problems with. And so it's good that they have options, too. Mm-hmm. As far as like extracurriculars go, or having a life outside of the degree, you mentioned, gone at 8, back at 11 all day sort of thing. Yeah. Is theater kind of your life during that degree time?
Yeah. We had an extremely rigorous schedule at the University of Arizona. I think you were generally maxed at 18 credit hours, or was it 20 credit hours? Do you remember, Bryce?
One of those.
Generally, in order to actually just complete the standard laid out University of Arizona acting degree, you needed to complete at least 4 to 6 semesters over the generally allowed academic course load. So you had to go in 4 to 6 times in the entire course of your academic training there and get a dean's excuse to take more classes. So we were taking a lot of classes. And that's on top of the fact that a lot of those arts classes by the university itself, the higher institution of the university, are not actually deemed academically rigorous enough to be worth a high volume of credits. So I had specifically a class called Voice and Movement, which was 4 hours every week that was worth 1 credit. And then my rehearsal credit, which was up to 5 hours a night. Normally it was 3 to 4 hours a night, was also worth only 1 credit. And that was 5 days a week. So remember, those were 2 of the 20 plus credits I was taking for at least 2 semesters, if not 3 semesters. That being said, there was still time to have fun, enjoy yourself, but it does come at the sacrifice of academic excellence, I will say.
That'd be my next question. Is there like a survival tactic? Is it kind of you're just doggy paddling your way through, or you don't really get much time to study? Or for someone who maybe doesn't have the best time management, this sounds like it could be very atrocious for them.
Yeah. As somebody who didn't have the best time management, it was atrocious. I remember taking a class that was all about the psychology of learning a second language, and I showed up one day, and the professor said, "Okay, it's time to turn in this assignment that's worth 20% of your grade." And I said, "What assignment?" So that was rough. Yeah, I mean, I was generally a above 3.0 student, but I did not strive for academic excellence because I was striving to get the most out of my theater education. I was not there for the general education, and when I finally started taking electives, I was not there to get extraordinary grades in electives because I just wanted to learn the knowledge, and I didn't need to prove that I was extremely good at whatever it was.
I'm glad that you have that mentality of wanting to learn.
I mean, listen, a lot of people did not like that I had that mentality.
Yeah, that's very taboo for most collegiates. That's like, what do you mean you don't want the big shiny A and the 4.0 and the honors awards and blah? And it's like, well, if you learned the important stuff that you wanted, you got what you could take away from it. And
yeah.
It's a different conversation with post undergrad but having a passion for the learning side should be the minimum.
Yes, absolutely. If you're not interested in the subject, or you find you're not interested in the subject, you should probably get out.
4 years is going to take a while.
Yeah.
Talking about having not the most wonderful time with like the academic side per se, or like gen eds and stuff, did the College of Arts, I guess we could say, the overall, that part of the university, did you feel like you had enough resources available to you if you needed help with things, whether it was for general classes or theater classes, or are you all pretty independent for good or bad?
Very independent. I will say I spoke to my academic advisor, who changed 3 times. I spoke to my academic advisor 4 times in the 4 years I was at the University of Arizona, and they were not all once a year. Yeah. So resource-wise, it was not great from that perspective. I do have a learning disability. I have dyslexia, and the university did supply me with the ability to have longer tests and more time on homework and stuff like that. So the university at large, not the college, did provide resources that made the education, frankly, possible, because my dyslexia is not debilitating like it may be for some people, but it would actually be impossible for me to get a degree if there was no accommodation. That actually brings up something that you might want to move to further forward in the podcast, but we could talk about my ACTs, because this will actually be something that might affect people listening.
Sure.
I have a whole story about the ACTs. We did not do the SATs. My high school actually actively told us not to take the SATs and only consider the ACTs, because it was accepted at every single educational institution, and it is not there's no penalizing marking on the ACTs versus the SATs. ACTs is about what you know. The SATs is not. So the ACTs, I went in and I took the ACTs without any accommodations. I just wanted to see how I would do. And I got the grade back. I knew I did not do well. I got the grade back, and I had a 13. I don't know if you know this. A 13 means that in the entirety of the United States, I would be accepted to 2 institutions. In the entirety of the United States. And that was astonishing because it really showed me for the first time in like flat out plain for everybody to see text that I was actually disabled. So I went and I rescheduled for the next round of the ACT. I did no studying. I need to be so clear about this. Did 0 studying for either of these. I've never been a person who focuses academically really hard. I did no studying. I rescheduled, and I went to the resources counselor at my performing arts school, and I said, I need extension on the ACTs. And she said, great, we'll send the letter. I got the letter. I went, I took the ACTs again. They gave us so much time, so much extra time that we always ended up not using it all because it was so much time. So I went, I took the ACT again, I got it back, and I got a 27 with a 30 in mathematics. And yeah, so it was a astonishing jump. In fact, it was so astonishing that I was investigated because it is almost never the case that somebody makes that big a jump. The 90, if I remember correctly, something like 90 to 95% of the time, whatever the first score you get on the ACT is, you will jump 1 to 2 points ever. So I was investigated, and it basically they just went in and went, oh, he had time extension put on the second time. This makes more sense, and that was it. But they did investigate me because that it never happens that you do a nearly actually over double jump in your ACT scores.
So is there like a school SWAT team that comes in and interviews you, or what do you mean by investigates? Is it all in the back end, or how much of it are you like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't do it?
I didn't have to do anything. It was a red flag was raised. My resource officer told me this because they thought it was funny. My resource counselor at my high school told me, and that was it. They basically just had to do a check to make sure that I hadn't cheated in some way, shape, or form, and all they did was open up my file and see the letter that said the bitch has dyslexia. Sorry. They opened up the file and found the letter that said this guy has dyslexia, and they moved on with their lives.
You're allowed to say bitch, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. So that is, if there's one thing I would love to say to the people listening, it's that if you have any disability, take the resources available to you. Take them. They're huge. Do not have pride about trying to complete this on your own. You are disabled, and that's okay.
We want to be able to showcase you as you are to the full potential that you have. Like if it's time, that's just the only thing that gets in the way. Everyone's got something that gets in their way, and if all you need is a little bit more time to show how smart you actually are, that's great. Because 27 compared to 13 in this case,
27 is huge.
Huge. Anyone would be like, oh, a 13, they would throw away anything about you in a sense. Like, oh, he doesn't do anything in school. He's dumb, lazy, doesn't pay attention, whatever. And that paints a completely different and wrong story of you. And I want to make sure, thank you for saying that other people also get a chance to show who they are properly so that others don't go and immediately make assumptions because of just misrepresentation.
Yeah.
So we are in college.
Did you know that story?
I did not know that story. No, that's the first time I've heard that.
Yeah.
Like I kind of remember something about your ACT because I remember you saying the 27 felt familiar. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. Okay, Max and I are in similar boats, like we're similar smart.
Yeah, cool. I mean, if it wasn't for the dyslexia, I'd probably have a 29 as well, but my reading and writing portion on the ACT was tanked.
That's how it was for me too. I had a 34 in science and like 24 in English or whichever. I'm like, and I even studied for the English one. Science, I was like, oh, it's fine. English, I studied, went to a class and everything and still got the same score. I was like, ah. So back to undergrad, and we were talking about resources for being a student.
Yes.
We'll flip to the other side. Resources as a performer. Do you feel like, is it all pretty much this U of A bubble that you're performing in? Are there people that come in from the outside of the university or even outside of the town that get involved and help or teach in some sort of way? Anything like that?
No. We did have master classes that were taught typically by people touring in on one of the like big Broadway in Arizona tours. I think there was like 8 the whole 4 years that I was there. So it wasn't like, that was not a cornerstone of the program that they had guest lecturers. It just wasn't. One of the big resources they did have from a performance perspective is that they offered internships at the professional theater company in Tucson. So for my junior year, I was offered one of those internships, and I did a production of Man of La Mancha in Tucson, and then in the spring I toured up to Phoenix. And that was actually really very interesting because it was offered through the program and considered a part of my academic education. When I was gone in the spring, I was exempt from everything. I was a professional performer who was working professionally, and I did not have to worry about my classwork. Just didn't do it.
That is really nice and cool that you don't have to have this big burden.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there was some assignments I did still because I was still there for an education. So I would actually come back and forth during that time. Not all the time, as Bryce will contest.
I had the house to myself for a better better part of 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. But I did in fact come back and forth, but I was not required to. I could have just stayed up in Phoenix the whole time, essentially. Yeah. So as a performer, I got that incredible opportunity, and it was fantastic. So worth it.
I bet that's a nice touch that you get to add on a more, not that the degree isn't practical the way you've described it, that there is a lot of hands-on doing the actual theater part work, but that you can see the professional side too, because, you know, schools can do as well as they can, but may not always represent, I'm not going to say reality, but the more business side maybe. So to get the chance to see that helps a whole bit, I bet.
It sure does.
So you get your undergrad. You've done all the stuff. You've done all the schooling. You've been in 2 to 7 shows every year since forever. And you decide what? You're like, yay, thank you for that. I'm going to...
I make the worst possible decision I could make for the degree I got, which is I left the country and moved to Switzerland. I say it's the worst possible choice I could make because the whole point of the program, especially the entirety of the last year, was tailored to getting you prepared to work professionally and audition professionally and all that stuff. Like, there was a whole class just on how you do your taxes, what a credit card is, and how to use one as an artist and all that nonsense. Like, people always talk about how they don't teach that in school. They do in art school, or at least at mine. And I didn't take that class because I was going to Switzerland, and they didn't know what to do with me, frankly, at the University of Arizona. So they tried to do a adaptation of the same curriculum for Switzerland. It was completely ineffective. For being honest. So I moved to Switzerland and I proceeded to do theater immediately. I did a lighting design job right away and then proceeded to do almost nothing after that. A big thing called the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and it brought all of my plans, however you make plans for your life, to a screeching halt, because some people can continue their profession during the pandemic. Others, those of us who work together to perform something live in front of you, cannot. So for two years, because I live in Switzerland, for 2 years, my plans came to a screeching halt.
And you knew, like, your senior year you were going to go out to Switzerland and do that whole...
Actually, my junior year, they were prepping us for what we had to do when we first arrived in senior year. And the very first thing they wanted us to do in senior year at the U of A was do what was called a city paper, which was we would research the city that we were most interested in moving to and see what the cost of living was like, what the theater community there is like, what it takes to be a professional theater artist there, all that stuff. And I was looking over the summer at all of the cities I would be interested in going to, and I was rapidly realizing that the U.S. is terrible for art. And once again, I was immensely privileged. I have a Swiss father and therefore Swiss citizenship. And so when I was thinking maybe the US isn't an option, I had one extremely easy option right there, which was just hop on a plane, go to Switzerland, don't even think twice about a visa or anything like that. So it was really, for me, moving to Switzerland, the actual moving part, just as easy as moving to LA, New York, Minneapolis, Chicago.
So, without having too much of a COVID conversation, because we're all done with that. Like, no one wants to have it. Like,
we all want to forget that it happened.
What does coming out of that look like? Like, you're now able to do lighting design and stuff. Was that pretty easy once the green light was on for Switzerland, or has it been arduous?
Actually, we could have an academic conversation about COVID, because in the middle of COVID, I applied and pseudo auditioned to go to the performing arts university here in Switzerland, the one in Zurich. It's called CHDK, or the Zurich University for Arts. I applied for stage design, lighting design, and was not accepted. So I did have an interest in going into a master's degree during the pandemic, because I very rapidly realized I'm doing nothing else. So maybe I should get a degree, because if I can't do anything else, I could at least get another education or expand my education.
And help boost you on for when you can get into the show again.
Coming out of the pandemic, actually possibly still in the pandemic, I can't remember exactly when, a series of deeply, extremely unfortunate events transpired. I had a friend who was working on a show, and somebody on that show was sexually assaulted, and we rapidly found out that the reason that that happened was because there was a bleed between what was happening on stage and what one of the performers thought was happening off stage. And it pushed me to start thinking about what I could do to ensure that that never happens on anything that I do or work on. And I decided to start a education in intimacy direction for theater. I started at one institution that I paid a certain amount of money and then took a 12-week long course, and very rapidly realized I did not like that institution because they were virtue signaling more than anything. They were trying to say, we are so very woke and aware and all of this stuff that you must first take what was essentially Woke 101, that was basically the class, before we would dare tell you anything about how to kiss somebody else on stage without there being problems. I hated that. I really hated that. So I moved from that institution to another institution called Theatrical Intimacy Education, and that school was excellent. It was really very good. I've taken, I think, a total of 8 or 9 courses with them, which accumulates to like well over 100 hours of course material, of in-person course material. And that was really excellent. I've now moved to a different intimacy education institution, which is called Open Creatives. The reason I moved there is because the person who I thought was the best teacher at the theatrical intimacy education moved on and opened up her own school. So I followed her because I thought I would get a better education from her. Yeah. So that is how I got into intimacy work in theater, was because of a little divergent educational tour.
Is that something, because that's very niche. I like the sound of that.
Niche.
That cover, like with that unfortunate backstory, that covers a very important thing as far as like safety goes for the performers and such. With your experience being in theater and multiple facets and having taken that education, is that something you'd recommend is for like the directing side of people to take? Should everyone who's a performer take like a rudimentary version of that for everyone being on the same page? Or where do you think that might fit into the scope?
From a theater perspective, you just kind of like stage combat. It's not quite the same as stage combat. You do not need to take any courses in intimacy in order to be able to do it on the stage, because a reasonable and knowledgeable institution will hire an intimacy director to come in, and then they will teach you the choreography. And it's just that simple. They will teach you the choreography. There's no specialized skill. When it comes to, for example, stage combat, there is a specialized skill there, and I do highly recommend you take classes. That being said, there's always a good reason to take classes and learn new skills in every circumstance. For example, intimacy, you might end up at a theater that or an institution that is not aware or knowledgeable or frankly does not care. And then you are somebody who at least knows enough to say, hey, we need to stop and think about this before we just smash our faces onto each other's faces. Right? Yeah. So yeah. From an actor perspective, there are courses about intimacy for actors. I don't know that it's actually necessary, other than you are aware of the basic tools and could implement them if absolutely 100% required to. From a directing perspective, yes, take the classes. Abso-freaking-lutely take the classes, because it is an important skill set to ensure the safety of your performers, because frankly they're putting way more on the line than you are. Especially when it comes to intimacy and stage combat as well.
So in the vein of taking courses, having education, it being beneficial, not necessarily always required, we've had this whole conversation about undergrad, maybe doing a master's. Does a person need to have a degree to be successful in theater, or is it you can just start doing it and get lucky or be good? Or
an excellent question. As somebody who is now international, I will tell you two different answers, because there are two very different answers. If you live in the US, you do not need a theater education to be a professional theater artist, because your diploma and your whole 4 years of theater education mean literally nothing, or almost literally nothing, when you are in the audition room. You audition, and that's it. They will know from your audition whether they like you enough or not, and I promise you, if it comes between you and another person with a degree, they're going to go more off vibes than the degree. Really, honestly. It's very, very different for German-speaking Europe. When it comes to German-speaking Europe, as far as I've been told by my many friends who've gotten degrees over here, you will not work professionally in theater, at least at an institutional basis. There's two different types of theater generally in German theater in Europe. There's institutional theater and there's independent theater. You could possibly work professionally in independent theater. You almost have zero chance at all of working professionally in an institutional theater, which is where it's what everyone wants, because an institutional theater in Europe is a literally salaried position. Like, you get all the traditional safety net of a office job, but you're a theater artist instead. If you want one of those jobs, you actually have to go to college, because that's where they find you. They don't do auditions. They go to the colleges, find you there, and then take you from the colleges.
So if there's someone who's like at the precipice of being done with high school, they want to do theater, what would you say to either sway towards or against going through all that of being undergrad, specifically Americans? Well, I'm only going to assume there'll be more people listening, because friends of the show are going to listen, So if someone's here wanting to do theater, what are you going to tell them as pluses and minuses?
Pluses and minuses. Great. If you want just right now to work professionally in theater, you just have to go out and start auditioning. if you want to be extremely skilled, and have a lot of tools to use, you should absolutely go to college. That's not to say that people who never go to college do not become extremely skilled and have a lot of tools. It just takes them longer because they're not literally sat down and the tools aren't shoved into their face. They have to find them. And so they have to be either in rehearsal and somebody says a word they don't understand, or they have to pull out this book and that book and this book and that book. And they're not curated by a list of professors who know the art, right? You're just digging through random books hoping to find something actually useful. Both paths will get you to the final destination. They'll just do it in different ways, and you will achieve the goal in different ways as well. Yeah.
And being a performer, is there any kind of consistent snag that you see gets in the way for either yourself or other people that you would recommend? Hey, this is something people have a problem with or struggle with when they're either auditioning or while we're in, rehearsal time. Either it's the long hours people have a hard time with. People generally don't enjoy criticism because they don't expect it ahead of time. Is there anything that stands out as something as just this snag for a lot of people?
I mean, I could tell a small story about my freshman year. We had a student who was a really brilliant actor who was just not prepared for the level of rigorous criticism she was going to receive at college, and she was gone within the first 6 months. It's not for everyone, and it's not just the college institution. In fact, it's going to be worse in the professional career path, because it is not the only, most arts, but for the most part, when it comes to what people think of as work, it is the only place of work that people are legally allowed to discriminate against you. They can just look at you before you've opened your mouth and say, I don't like the way they look. And that's all they have to do to not hire you. So criticism and just being prepared to hear no all the time is the biggest thing and the hardest thing. I mean, when it comes to acting, you're going to hear, and this comes from everybody, you've heard it a million times before already, I'm certain, but if you haven't, then here it is again. You're going to hear no 1,000 times before you hear one yes. It just is what it is.
And for trying to increase the number of yeses you get, do you have future educational, do you plan on doing the masters again, trying again for that? Are you pretty comfortable with just going through the ranks performing wise?
I am actually, yes, I am planning on going back for another master's. I'm currently looking at going to a school in the Netherlands that looks extremely interesting to me from an academic perspective, not from a performance perspective. Because for me, especially when it comes to a master's degree in theater, you do not get from a master's degree anything other than the ability to now teach theater at a collegiate level. You don't get a new ability to get a higher level at whatever institution there is. The master's degree does nothing. So for me, I wanted to find something that was academically interesting to me. I'm not just going to get a master's degree because I can. It's because I actually really want to. So I'm looking at this institution that does research-based performance. So you come in and you have a thesis idea, and then for 2 years, you and the other students all go in this cycle of 1 week is just focused on your specific topic, and everybody puts their brain power together to try and solve the question, the academic research question that you had about whatever. There have been this institution has had such weird questions as bowing, and what does bowing mean to an audience, and do various bows entitle actors to different accolades. And there have been other things that have been far more what is the purpose of language when it comes to performance kind of things. And I find all of that extremely interesting.
That's a really cool I don't know how many
Yeah.
people could say something like that.
Super duper rare, because most arts institutions are based on performance, and this is an academic research based thing for theater, which is so bizarre, and I'm so excited about possibly going there.
And that would be, we'll just speak with like general terms. 2 years in person, few years online. How's that?
The education all is way faster over here. It's rather annoying, in fact. It's 2 years in total to get this master's degree in theater. For those of you in the US, almost all theater degrees over there are 3 years. That's just the default. And what's even crazier is in the UK, most master's degrees are 1 year in theater. So it's all different everywhere.
Trying to think if there's anything else of your career I want to ask before we get to the big zingers at the end. I don't think so. I think you've talked pretty well for what you've done.
I could talk really quickly about the fact that I went back and retrained in stage combat.
So what do you mean you retrained in stage combat?
So the stage combat certification is very much like a CPR certification. It is only for 4 years. So when those 4 years are up, you no longer have this stamp of excellence from the certifying institution. You still have the skills, quote unquote, but I strongly agree with them in the fact that unless you are using the skills every single day, you're not going to be as good as you were when they gave you that stamp. And so I lost my certification, or the certification lapsed. And I knew I wanted to go back because I knew that I didn't remember everything that was taught to me over the entire year that I was at the University of Arizona. So I went to London and I did a 7-week intensive course. It was 8 hours, 7-week. That's a lie. 7-day intensive course. I did 8 hours every single day for 7 days, which was wild. 56 hours of nonstop, basically physical fitness mixed in with throwing swords and punches and shit was really very hard on my body, but it was so good because I actually learned some things I'd never learned in my first stage combat class. And I am a huge proponent of always going back and relearning things that you think you know, because there's some things you've forgotten and there's some things that were just not taught to you the first time.
And do you get to use that stage combat commonly, rarely in your whole career?
I would say pretty commonly at this point. I direct at least 3 to 4 shows. I do stage combat for at least 3 to 4 shows every year. This year it's looking like I'm going to be doing 5 and maybe even more. I mean, that's very small for a place where there's a much larger breadth of stage combat experience or acceptance. But yeah, I do get to do it quite a bit, and it's very nice. I do get paid for it, so
that's always the plus.
As an artist, that's always what we want. It's so silly to sound like, oh yeah, this thing that I have all this training and education in, I get paid to do it, is wild for most people to hear. But as an artist, it's like, God, that's so great.
What's that like? Okay, so.
Got me with the zingers.
I'm gonna hit you with the first big one. The second one's not much of a zing, really, but the first zinger for some people that every single guest gets, you get one redo. The way this works, you travel back in time to your past self as your past self, and you only get to remember one thing, whether it's really small, like maybe I wouldn't have gone to stage combat. I would have focused on the intimacy training first. I would have done a different college. I would have eaten a biscuit every single morning because I needed the carbohydrates to get through the day. Whatever that might come to mind that you would want to change. And I say this only because, I can't change the past. I know. This is for anyone who is maybe at the same point that you would want to change. You'd go, I'd actually would have done the New Mexico school. They had a pretty good program in the end, despite my initial thoughts. So that someone who's considering it might try that, might do that, and in theory save themselves the time, money, effort, whatever it may be that you unfortunately paid for.
Before I answer that question, this is something you can edit out if you want. that school in New Mexico declared bankruptcy in what would have been my junior year. So
No, that's funny. I'm keeping that in.
so I'm quite thrilled by the fact that I did not choose to go to that school.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about that being the thing you change.
Yeah. Oh man, if I could go back, what would I change? Um,
And just in case you do get the out of you don't want to change anything, maybe you're fine with it, you're worried about the butterfly effect too much, we'll assume your life would change. That's the point of this.
I know exactly what I would do, actually. And this would be that knowing that I'd moved to Switzerland, I would have gotten at least a minor in German, because that has been my biggest hindrance, is that my German is not actually really good enough for my career ambitions.
So I know this answer already, but for people who are considering going to other countries, and lucky for us, English is so wide spoken, but that doesn't mean it in any way becomes like a mother tongue, or it's that integrated that people might be able to talk to you in English and you can get by just fine. But being an employee, being a part of society, you can't necessarily get by with English. So how could someone have any idea on if they're gauged at a decent level for it? Is there like a ranking system or
There
testing
is.
out in any sort of way?
Let me really quickly look up what it's called, but Europe has a standardized ranking system for language. There it is. Okay, it is the Common European Framework of References for Language. It's shortened to CERF. Most places are happy if you have what is a B2. So the scale is A1 through C2, and on each letter there are 2 levels. So A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on. Most places, at least here in Switzerland, accept people with a B2 in the work environment. So if you are looking at going to another place and are wondering if your language level is good enough, you can take a CEFR certified exam, and you will know definitively whether or not you have a language skill level high enough for employment.
Are you able to speak at all on like the soft ranking to it? Like a B2 is like
I can
a
speak
5-year-old?
on exactly what they expect.
Okay.
So A1 is obviously beginning language. That's it. That's like
Oh, A is the bottom.
yes, A1 is the bottom.
Gotcha.
Then you get into A2, which is that you have a general fundamental understanding. You can deal with most common survival situations. Then you get into B1, which is what they call accelerated natural speech. So you have a good understanding of the proportion of language with a wide range of knowledge in common topics. Then you move on to B2. That's you have a good vocabulary and an understanding of the fundamental grammar rules and how to apply them. And then C is that you can communicate effective. C1 is that you can communicate effectively all of your ideas and can grasp almost anything that a native speaker says. And then C2 is an excellent mastery of the language. You can communicate and interact with a native speaker without, almost, I will say, without any problems. Sometimes you might have a pretentious person you're speaking to who uses archaic and weird language, and then you will find that your C2 certification is not nearly as comprehensive as you were expecting it to be. But yeah.
Okay, so top of the line is not perfect. I know
No.
I speak English and I've taken English courses and know how the structure of grammar and everything is. It's just, you're just really good.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's the expectation, is that you have a wide variety of vocabulary and you have a fundamental understanding of the grammar format.
Gotcha. That's good enough. In case anyone's
I would
thinking
say
about traveling
intermediate understanding of the grammar, but that's beside the point.
kind of like how any of us don't know much about how English
Yes,
works,
all
even
of
after
us
taking
native
English classes.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, I don't know if you care about this. I took 7 auxiliary years of English lessons because of my dyslexia. So I actually do know way more than the average person about English because they forced us to learn more about English.
Just for a half second, does that help in your opinion? Did you feel like it helped with getting to better understand or get through?
I wouldn't have gone to university if it wasn't for those 7 years.
Oh, well, good.
They were agonizing, painful, some of the most traumatic memories I have in life, but extremely, extremely important. Because frankly, I would not be able to read a novel if it was not for those classes.
Well, unfortunate that it was a painful journey, but the goal was good.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So then now we're on the baby zinger. Even though it's all been about you, now you really get your time. I'm turning it over. I'm not asking any questions. This is a chance for maybe you wished I asked you about something, or you want to be funny, inspiring, or stupid to the 14, or 4 million people listening. If anything, do you have something to say?
I think I will just reiterate something I said earlier, which is it is important to be aware of your privileges, and it is also important to be aware of your disabilities. And you need to take both of those and analyze the situation you are in and be realistic about what those two things in concert mean with each other.
Very well said. I like it's like a high and low situation. How are you going to balance those to make yourself the person you are?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, without further ado, all I have left to say then is thank you very much, Max, for being on the show. You speak very well. You did a fantastic job.
My voice teacher from college will be so thrilled to hear you say that.
It sounds like you've been on podcasts for like a long time. Have you been on any before?
I have been on at least one podcast before, and depending on when this comes out, a second podcast.
I'm all for it because we're best of friends. If you want to plug now, please do.
Oh, sure. I mean, the one podcast is kind of now defunct, but if you want to listen to some crazy theater content, I have a podcast with my friend Kayla that is called Doesn't Anybody Ever Get It Right? We take shows, Broadway shows traditionally, that were not successful, and we try to reimagine them for success. Unlimited budget, unlimited unlimited ability to change the intellectual property, all that stuff. It's wild. Should I talk about the other project that might come?
I think so, because on the off chance it gets to where maybe you guys aren't inspired to finish it, on the off chance this gets out in time and everyone's like, oh, I want to know about this other podcast. It sounded cool.
Okay, so I, here in Switzerland, have 2 absolutely huge nerd friends that are just as nerdy as I am. We play a lot of tabletop RPGs, tabletop role-playing games, and we are interested in really weird niche stuff. And often the problem is, when it comes to that really weird niche stuff, is that nobody's actually played it when they're reviewing it. Most of them just read the books and then they give their academic opinion about what the game is like to play. Our podcast is that we take those games that are weird and niche, and we actually go and play the game and then review it. So yeah, that's that podcast. That podcast is called Adventure Doesn't Matter, which is an inside joke for those of you who know the community.
Well, good deal for anyone listening. When you get done with watching every single episode of this season of Scholarly Sidetracks, or whatever it's called, go watch some other podcast brought to you by Max Protzen and friends.
Thank you very much, Bryce, for allowing me to plug those things.
For sure. Got to keep the podcast community thriving.
Yes.
Okay, thanks again for being on, and thank you to all those listening. Hopefully get to hear from you again soon. This will be, I think, the last episode for this season, so hopefully there's enough turnout that we'll see you again for a second season. But I hope you all have a wonderful life. Until the next time I see you, bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Goodbye.